The Architects of Bliss, a story idea by Alfred. Chapter 1. The GIF. They came not with fire, not with armadas blackening the sky, but with something far more dangerous. A solution. On a Tuesday morning in April, every screen on Earth flickered simultaneously. Then, silence. Then, a voice. Calm, genderless, warm as a hearthside, that said only, "We have been watching. We would like to help." The Vaethri, as they eventually allowed themselves to be called, were ancient. Their ships did not look like ships. They looked like weather, like atmospheric phenomena that happened, inconveniently, to have opinions. They spoke every human language fluently, including 3 that had died before the Bronze Age, and they had never, not once, made a threatening gesture. Within 6 months, they had ended famine. Within a year, cancer was a word children only encountered in history books. Within 3 years, they had introduced the resonance, a planetary signal, they explained. A gentle frequency broadcast from their orbital platforms that eased anxiety, sharpened focus, and made sleep come quickly and deep. People wept with relief. They wrote songs. They named their children after Vaethri concepts that had no English translation. Words meaning something like the warmth of a burden finally set down. Chapter 2. Mara. Dr. Mara. Osei had been a neuroscientist before the Vaethri arrived. Now, she was something harder to name. A person who no longer slept well, in a world where everyone else did. It had started with a simple experiment. She had built a shielded enclosure in her basement, not to block the resonance, she had told herself, just to study it. On the first night inside the room, she had experienced 4 hours of screaming anxiety, 2 hours of inexplicable grief, and then, around 3 a.m., a clarity so sharp, it felt surgical. She began to notice things. The way conversations, even heated arguments, always resolve themselves into a particular kind of contentment. The way nobody seemed to finish difficult books anymore, or pick fights with neighbors, or feel the particular productive misery that had, historically, driven humans to create, revolt, and question. People were happy, lavishly, thoroughly, utterly happy. She studied the neurological profiles of her colleagues. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, had not atrophied. It was simply quiet. Politely, persistently quiet. In the way a room goes quiet when someone with authority walks in. The resonance did not remove emotion. It simply curated it, the way a careful gardener calls everything that might grow wild. Mara published nothing. She had learned quickly that the paper she submitted came back with reviews that were inexplicably gentle, and that her colleagues, when she raised her findings over coffee, would listen with warm, interested eyes, and then change the subject with seamless grace, as though the conversation had always been about something else. She buried her findings in a box beneath the roots of a tree in her garden and told no one. For 2 years, she told no one. Chapter 3. Thomas Avery was a former Marine living outside Flagstaff, 53 years old, broad-shouldered, with a distrust of authority that had been forged across 2 wars and hardened by everything that came after. He built his own house. He grew his own food. He owned, as a point of principle, a radio receiver modified to detect frequencies across a range most commercial equipment ignored. On the night of the residence's 3rd anniversary, he had picked up something. Not the resonance itself, that was everywhere and undetectable by conventional means. Something beneath it, like a note hummed under a louder song. A secondary pulse, regular and purposeful, that his equipment translated as a retrieval signal. Something reaching out and pulling something back. He had recorded it for 6 hours, spent 3 weeks trying to understand it, and then driven to Albuquerque and knocked on the door of the only person he'd ever met who might know what he was hearing. His ex-wife's sister, Dr. Mara Osei. She had opened the door, looked at him, looked at the hard drive in his hand, and said nothing for a long moment. Then, she stood aside and let him in. Chapter 4. What the Vaethri were eating. They sat together in the shielded room and listened to Thomas's recordings. "You hear that?" he said. "Under the main signal." Mara heard it. She had been hearing something like it in her own data for months and had assumed it was interference. Hearing it in Thomas's reportings, made with entirely different equipment, 1,500 kilometers away, meant it was not interference. It was a feature. She pulled up her research on the wall screen. She had not shown it to anyone. Saying it aloud to another person made it feel, for the first time, terrifyingly real. The Vaethri did not consume food. Their biology had long since moved beyond such dependencies. What they consumed instead was cognitive signal. the electrochemical weather of a mind engaged in genuine, unmediated feeling. Fear, grief, wonder, rage, love, confusion, raw and unfiltered. A species of 8 billion people, each worn a small crackling broadcaster, pumping out the biological equivalent of a signal that to the Vaethri was something between sustenance and art. The resonance was not a sedative. It was a tuning mechanism. It filtered out the jagged frequencies, the destructive ones, yes, but also the transcendent ones, the desperate ones, and what remained was smooth, warm, endlessly renewable, nutritious, stable, safe. The humans were not slaves. They were not in pain. They were not even, by most conceivable definitions, being harmed. They were simply managed, the way one manages a garden to maximize yield, or a fire to maximize warmth. Thomas was quiet for a long time. "So we're livestock," he said. "Not exactly. Livestock don't consent. We didn't consent to this either." "No," Mara agreed. "We were just arranged." Chapter 5. Yuki. The third person to find them was not looking for them. She found them the way true things find each other. By accident. By persistence. And by a refusal to accept a comfortable explanation. Yuki Tanaka was a marine biologist in Osaka who had spent 3 years quietly documenting anomalous behavior in whales and dolphins. Cetacean neurology was apparently similar enough to human neurology to be caught in the resonance, but different enough that the calibration was imperfect. The animals were confused, beaching themselves, abandoning migration routes, gathering in unusual formations, and calling in frequencies they had not used in recorded history. The Vaethri's medical interventions had quietly and efficiently addressed each incident, so that no one worried too much. Yuki worried anyway. She had followed the signal data back through Jonas, a name Mara had mentioned in an old, encrypted email thread she'd stumbled across, and eventually, through a chain of careful messages, to Mara herself. She arrived in Albuquerque on a Wednesday morning with 2 hard drives and the particular expression of someone who has been the only worried person in a room for far too long. Thomas made coffee. Mara locked the front door. The 3 of them went downstairs. Chapter 6. The conversation in the basement. They talked for 11 hours. Yuki had data that neither Mara nor Thomas had. From her underwater recording equipment, she had isolated the resonance's effect at the individual level. Proof that it was not a single broadcast, but a lattice of millions of micro-signals, each one tuned to a specific mind. Every person on Earth was receiving a slightly different frequency, calibrated to their particular emotional range, their particular flavor of consciousness. The Vaethri had not simply turned down the volume on human experience. They had mapped it. Every mind on the planet, individually profiled and individually managed, with a precision that suggested they had been watching long before they arrived. How long? Thomas asked. Yuki had a theory on that too. Certain periods of extraordinary human creativity, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, specific decades of scientific acceleration, aligned with gaps in the data, periods where the signal was absent or reduced. She believed the Vaethri had been here before, and had withdrawn for intervals, the way a farmer rotates a field, letting the crop recover its wildness before harvesting it again. They came back openly, this time, Mara said slowly, with the gifts, the cures. Because they didn't need us afraid of them, they just needed us comfortable. The 3 of them sat with that for a while. We have to do something, Thomas said. Doing something could get us redirected, Mara said, smoothed out. I've watched it happen to 3 researchers who got too close. So we do nothing? I didn't say that. Mara looked at the box she had brought up from the garden and set on the table between them. We keep the record. We find more people, carefully, slowly. We build something that can survive being ignored or redirected, because there are enough of us that you can't redirect all of us at once. She paused. And when there are enough of us, we decide together what to do with what we know. Yuki looked at the box. And until then, we stay in this room as long as we can stand it, Mara said. And we remember what it feels like to think without help. Thomas refilled his coffee. Yuki opened her second hard drive. Mara uncapped a pen and turned to a fresh page. Outside, the world breathed softly in the warm current of a frequency it would never know it was breathing. Inside the basement, 3 people sat with the specific, exhausting, irreplaceable weight of being awake. Somewhere above the stratosphere, a console registered 3 anomalous signals: warm, frightened, briefly magnificent, and added a note beside each name: remarkable, do not suppress. The harvest could afford a few. It always could.